Thank you, Louis, and good afternoon, everyone. So we've just lulled you all into a very nice, relaxed, belly full situation, and we're going to jump straight into the second panel now. So I'm happy to be moderating the panel, panel 2, which is on planetary health, crisis, repercussions, and governance. Now I believe our panelists are all with us, yes? Okay, so welcome to our panelists. I can't see you, but I'm assuming you can see me. Okay, oh, there you are, okay. So hello everyone, good afternoon to you. I'll just do a very brief intro of each of our speakers. Their bios are actually in the program booklet, so you can have a look. First up, we have Dr. Dhanasri Jairam, who is an assistant professor in the Department of Geopolitics and International Relations at the Mahal Academy of Higher Education, India. Her presentation is on transforming environmental and health policies in India towards a planetary health approach. And then we'll have next speaker will be Dr. Zhou Changgui, who is a senior research fellow, Overseas Safety and Security Program, NTS-PD, Zhejiang University in China, and Director, OSS International Collaboration Mechanism Center and Observer at the International Code of Conduct Association. And Dr. Zhou will be speaking on progress in environmental and health governance in China and Asian NIMBY issues. Ms. Shivani De Silva unfortunately could not be with us this afternoon, so she sends her regrets. So next up will be Dr. Jyoti M. Prathanya. She's a senior fellow and chairperson Outreach, Center for Land Warfare Studies in India, and also the founding editor of online Indian Journal of Peace and Conflict Resolution. And then we have Ms. Novia Su, the researcher at the Center for Strategic and International Studies, Indonesia. Dr. Jyoti will be speaking on India's environmental security and planetary health and assessment. And Ms. Su will be speaking on accelerating Indonesia's climate actions for planetary health. We are fortunate that we have one more speaker joining us, Professor Tomonori Yoshizaki. His information is not in the program booklet that you have, so I'll just very briefly read out his bio. Professor Tomonori is a Vice President of Academic Affairs of the National Institute for Defense Studies of Japan's Ministry of Defense, where he is in charge of directing research projects and military education on strategic issues. His areas of expertise include Japan's peace operation, conflict resolution, peace building, and civil-military cooperation. He is currently a member of a research project on security sector governance of Global Security Center National Defense Academy. Professor Tomonori has published widely, his latest publications being NATO and the Dilemma of Unity, Crisis of Ukraine, Populism, and COVID-1 in 2021, and Japan's Free and Open Indo-Pacific Vision, Strategic Implications for Europe, and that came out in 2019. The professor will comment on Japan's approach to HADR and COVID. So with that, can we, we'll get started with our first speaker. Now each speaker, I believe it has 15 minutes to present. So can we have Dr. Dhanasri up first, please? Yeah. Dr. Dhanasri, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Dr. Tamara Nair, and thank you to the organizers for inviting me to this to speak in this panel on planetary health. So I'll just start sharing my screen. Just a second. Is it visible, the screen? I'll just make it full screen.
Yes.
Yeah, okay. Okay. Yeah. So as Dr. Tamara and I mentioned, what I'm going to be talking about is to see how India's environmental and health policies have evolved in conjunction with each other. What are the complementarities and what are the challenges in bridging the gap between the two? Like even the previous session, I think there's been a lot of introduction to a lot of challenges that India faces and also other countries in South Asia in particular. And how do we transform these policies in a way that it can meet the requirements of the so-called planetary health approach? And how do we really achieve this? So I will be just reflecting a bit on how do we achieve this, and also, but before that, I will also be talking about some of the challenges and some of the problems that we face. So the concept of planetary health, it's not new. But it's also not something that is well developed in countries of South Asia, for instance, where the integration between various policies have not been addressed in the way they should be, considering, today we're talking about risks that are not necessarily just work in silos. We're talking about cascading risks, compounding risks, systemic risks. So different types of risks that interact with each other. And this has to do with, environmental issues, health issues, economic issues, social issues, political issues. So these are all interlinked with each other at different levels. So what we are talking about, whether it is in terms of climate change, biodiversity, food security, water security, land use management, for instance, soil-related issues, all these are interlinked with each other. And I think the lessons that we have learned from COVID-19 in particular have made us aware of these interlinked risks or intersecting risks, which is something that also is being addressed by this planetary health approach, so that we don't deal with these issues in silos, but we look at them in a more systematic and integrated manner, whether it's at the institutional level or sectoral level, disciplinary level, and other levels as well. So what I'm going to do is to start with a few examples so that I can set the context for what I'm really talking about. Last year, in fact, India experienced several cyclones, and this has become like a regular phenomenon now. The frequency and the intensity of cyclones have increased in the region, in the South Asian region in particular. We had two big cyclones in particular, like Cyclone Tauktae, Cyclone Amphan, and these cyclones actually coincided with the deadly Delta wave of COVID-19, during which many people were affected because of the lack of oxygen cylinders, because of the lack of medical facilities. And the cyclones basically added to the burden of the existing health infrastructure, which itself is not well equipped to deal with the kind of catastrophe that the country faced. So what the cyclones did was to also disrupt the health infrastructure, electricity infrastructure, due to which much of healthcare facilities were also affected on both the eastern coast and the western coast. So both these cyclones happened, the Cyclone Tauktae happened in the Arabian Sea, the Cyclone Amphan happened in the Bay of Bengal region. Overall, healthcare was affected. At the same time, there were compounding risks as well, cascading risks. For instance, some of the regions were heavily flooded, and that made COVID-19 relief and response even tougher for the governance machinery. So in that sense, this is one example to show how issues today are too much interlinked with each other. The other example, of course, I'm sure this is something that is often mentioned about the pollution levels in Indian cities. Now it's not just cities, but even rural areas in India are being affected by the increasing levels of air pollution. But this is one of the major risks, major security risks, in fact, faced by the Indian populations. Because this is not just it's not just like a public health disaster, but it's also leading to economic losses. It is also affecting, the lives of the people in a big way. Delhi is probably in the news all the time, but in reality, most of the Indian cities are facing this problem of severe air pollution levels. Water pollution is yet another example. water pollution, I mean, Ganges is possibly the most discussed one. There's been a lot of efforts to deal with pollution in the Ganges. This is just one picture of, industrial effluents being released into the waters of the Ganges. Of course, more regulations have come to prevent this from happening. There is also newer regulations which prevent, construction work within certain kilometers of the Ganges River. Also release of various effluents and other objects into the river. But yet the problem is that the level at which this river is polluted today, it becomes much harder to revive. It's beyond revival, as some would call it. And more and more efforts are being made, but to no vain. But they are all in vain. So in that sense, the water pollution is also a major problem that is leading to several public health related concerns in the Indo-Gangetic plains. Heat waves and heat stress. Now, I don't have to talk about this. I think in the recent times, even just recently, in fact, it's an ongoing phenomenon where heat waves are becoming more and more common, and this is also leading to less working hours, more diseases. Many people dying of heat-related heat strokes, for instance. So this is another example of how climate change-related rising temperatures and also urban heat islands, as we call it, this is something that is leading to more and more problems in the Indian cities. Now, I'll shift to now policies and where does Indian policy stand with respect to some of these problems that I mentioned. One of the earliest, triggers for environmental and health policies to be designed in India was the Bhopal gas tragedy, which happened in 1984. Since then, there's been a lot of emphasis laid on more and more policies on environmental and health-related risks. And this is a tragedy that I suppose everybody has heard of, the Union Carbide plant, which led to a gas leak of methyl isocyanate, and that led to the deaths of thousands of people. The official figures may be less, but more and more people have been affected, and of course, a lot of people haven't even received compensation for it. So this led to the enactment of several laws to ensure that people get justice. Although in this case also, I would say justice still has not been delivered on many counts. Since if you look at, of course, there are several other, these landmark moments. 1972 Stockholm Conference also led to many laws coming to the picture in India. And if you look at the policies that are there in India with respect to especially environmental policies, they follow a lot of principles, right? So, I mean, if you look at some of the policies, of course, a lot of them actually emphasize more of a polluter pays principle, where like the industries or whoever is polluting needs to pay for the pollution as well. So this is something that is being enacted through institutions like the Central Pollution Control Board, State Pollution Control Board. You have Air Pollution Act, Water Pollution Act, whole lot of other acts which technically follow the polluter pays principle. So, so that's one of the major principles that are followed. There are some cases where the precautionary principle is also very much there, so that you don't wait for scientific certainty to actually deliver. You already put in place measures to ensure that the so-called unintended harm is not caused because of the developmental activities that are being carried out. There's also issues that are of common interest to all the people. So the public trust principle is also very important in that sense. Sustainable development is, of course, something that has been talked about a lot, and I don't want to delve into it much. Public participation is an interesting aspect of Indian environmental laws, although increasingly this is something that is being diluted as well. So the environmental impact assessment notification is one of the major measures through which public participation is being, it's being implemented. And also there are other acts like the Forest Rights Act is another one in which the government is also expected to ensure that there is enough public participation in how environmental laws are implemented at the local level. So India's environmental governance is something that happens as a multi-level governance, right? So it's not something that is just at the central level. So you have many issues which are dealt by at the state level and the local level. There are issues which are, in the concurrent list. So this is more like, something that falls under the category of, both the state and the center. There are Environmental Protection Act and other kinds of acts which are, which are more kind of guided by the center. So in that sense, it is also important to have coordination between the center and the state, and also at the district level. For instance, with the COVID-19 responses, but the district authorities were empowered to carry out a lot of activities. With co-benefits, I think this is something that has been added to the list of, list of principles that are being followed. So co-benefits is, when you look at, say, climate change, and why does India want to act on climate change? It is not just because of mitigation or adaptation. It is also because, okay, this is something that would also help our developmental priorities, or this is something that would help secure India's energy supplies by, say, investing more in renewable energy, or by reducing air pollution. You also contribute to health security, and you also contribute to climate or environmental security. So co-benefits is something that is being actively, if it may not be mentioned in the policies, but this is an approach that actively is being invoked to ensure that India's policies are sort of complementary, looking at different issues at the same time. But where does India's environmental regulation stand in respect to the kind of threats that we are facing? So yes, in a big way, the kind of problems that we are facing, far outweigh this wide network of laws and regulations that we have put in place. So in reality, including, like, you have coastal regulation, zone notification, waste management rules, which are actually, every year this is being amended and improved, including on plastic waste, now that India has also decided to ban single-use plastic. So there are multiple laws that are in place. But the kind of problems that we are facing far outweigh, and this image kind of shows that the ecosystems and environment are being affected heavily. So what are the failures? And I think even the previous session, I heard some of the speakers talking about what are the challenges and what are the failures in that sense. And they are pretty common among most of the countries, right? So yes, there is dilution of many of these laws. Like I mentioned, in the case of the environmental impact assessment is one such notification. Coastal regulation, zoning is another one, which has been diluted over a period of time to enhance development, reduce public participation. Although it says that yes, it will have more say, but then many projects are being exempted from some of these requirements as well. So there are competing interests. There are different kinds of actors involved in ensuring that these laws do not work in the way they are expected to. There is a level of bureaucratic inefficiency as well in implementing them. So some of these regulations have been in place for a while, but it takes longer to implement them. There is a lack of enforcement and implementation of regulations. Many industries, for instance, they get away with meager fines for polluting. So despite long drawn environmental protests and social protests, and still they get away with just meager fines. There is, of course, a lack of coordination also between different implementing agencies. So sometimes, the hierarchy is not very clearly, it's not very clearly outlined for these agencies to work in a smooth manner. I will end with actually climate change, and then come to how do we transform the policies that we have. This is something that has been used quite a lot as to how climate change impacts human health in a big way. So, I think in the previous session also this image was shown. So it affects the food supply problem, air pollution. It also affects water security, extreme heat, severe weather events. In all ways, and it's not just the vector-borne diseases or the diseases, but it's also health in a much broader sense. So, this is something that is being affected heavily. So it's also a psychological issue now. There are neurological diseases which are being also talked about now because of various environmental problems. So in fact, National Program on Climate Change and Human Health, which was released in India, is trying to integrate human health actively into the climate change policies, which is something that is part of the National Action Plan on Climate Change itself. So these are some of the objectives. I'm not going into that because we will be running out of time, I think. Yeah, so I'll end with this last slide here, and what I'm trying to say here is mostly about systems thinking, and I think the examples that I mentioned, and also the how policies have evolved in order to ensure that some of these, especially like climate change, is something that is becoming like this, this connector between different policies that we have put in place. Although even climate change policies are not, and not advanced to that level, because we still have a problem of layering of institutions, which, that lack coordination between different agencies. But I think the Sustainable Development Goals, in fact, is one example, although it has its own follies. But you can see that this is something that tries to build on the systems thinking, that different systems, how they are interlinked with each other, and how these issues lead to a kind of and why we need a systems thinking that can then have a planetary health approach. So of course you need a multi-sector approach, you need multi-scalar, because even if you look at the air pollution problem, this is not something that is just vehicular pollution in a city. It is also something to do with, say, burning like the slash and burn, or burning that happens in the agricultural farms in the neighboring state. So this is something that is multi-scalar, right? So it's not something that is just city specific. So we need a multi-scalar approach. You also need although stakeholder may be not the right word always, you also have rights-based approach. So you have multi-stakeholder approach, and also people who have rights, so the right to life, for instance. This is something that is important. It's not just the human security level, but also at the ecological security level, because I think justice, as we talk about it, should be planetary justice, and not just about climate justice in the way which is more anthropocentric or human-centric. Because I think what we need to understand is that human beings are enmeshed in the natural systems that we have around us, and this is something that the policies need to also to understand or to acknowledge very actively. Some of the processes which are important in that sense, co-production of knowledge is something that also helps build that bridges between the scientific, other policy, and other kinds of communities. So knowledge should not be something that is just at the elite level. It's something that should be built from the bottom-up approach, where local knowledge, indigenous knowledge, local communities and their networks should also be part of the knowledge production. Joint monitoring and review, networking between different levels of governance, because this, as I mentioned, becomes very important for the systems thinking. It cannot be that, this is something that also requires a budgetary approach, a financial approach, which takes all these different players into the consideration. And fairness and efficiency is something that is very important. Fairness is, not just in terms of, legality, but also in terms of various other issues, whether it's socioeconomic conditions, and because we are also talking about various kinds of goals with respect to sustainable development. So all these issues are interconnected with each other, and this is where systems thinking needs to take us to the next level of integration. Integration is not always good, but then integration between issues that matter and also help the most vulnerable populations in terms of fairness and justice is something that is important for a planetary health approach. So yeah, thank you so much. I will end here, and happy to take questions later on.
Thank you, Dr. Dhanasri. We will now move to the next presenter. Dr. Cho, the floor is yours.
So, thank you so much, Professor. And I would like to also thank you for the invitation on behalf of Professor Yu Xiaofeng, the director of the NTS Center at Zhejiang University. My topic today is progress in environmental and health governance in China and cooperation for Asian nearby issues. Yes, over the past 40 years, the ecological and environmental problems accumulated, and with the 40 years of the rapid development after China's reform and opening up have become increasingly apparent. Even if the ecological environment quality is improved in general, it will take a long time to alleviate the health impact of environmental pollution on the population, which was also the similar situation of those industrialized countries in history. The increasing application of new materials and new chemicals makes the environmental and health problems complicated and difficult to deal with in a short time. At the same time, with the development of society and the continuous improvement of people's living standards, the public environmental awareness now is also further enhanced, putting forward the higher requirements for the government to effectively protect citizens' environmental rights and health rights. China's economic, social, cultural, and political achievements are well known over the past 40 years under the background of rapid industrialization and urbanization. However, disease in transition are also increasing. For example, somewhere rural residents were exposed to both emissions from solid fuel combustion and heavy metals from industry. The health impact of industrial pollution is something China is and will have to grapple with in coming decades. More stringent environmental regulations will be stipulated to protect China's land and rivers for producing safe food and providing safe drinking water. Population mobility, a key factor in economic and social change, also adds to the complexity. These problems bring different forms of governance challenges. Although these problems also exist to varying degrees in rich countries, industrialized countries, China's rapid economic growth during the reform period is more concentrated, and the problems are more acute. And the experience of the previous industrialized countries has limited reference value for China. Therefore, China has been on a long march in environmental and health governance with obvious characteristics. And the second, the progress in the environmental health and governance in China. The environmental and health picture in China is green, but there are also some positive trends. In fact, pre-industrialized countries relocated or outsourced polluting or extractive industries to developing countries. However, in history, while China has gradually increased its investment in agricultural production in other countries, market factors and development policies mean that industry will continue to transfer mainly within China. If pollution is not contained, its health effects will fall on the Chinese. In that sense, it's hard for China to make policies to shift losses as other countries do, because China can't find a replacement. China must take a way of self-therapy treatment for its main environmental and health impact in the history. So over the past 10 years, a lot of policies and even laws stipulated. In 2014, the Environmental Protection Law of PRC revised, added a special clause on protecting public health. And in October 2016, the CPC Central Committee and the State Council issued the outline of the Healthy China 2030 plan, in which building a healthy environment was included. In July 2019, the State Council issued the opinions of the State Council on the implementation of the Healthy China Action, and the Healthy China Action 2019 to 2030 was issued at a national level. So the above documents proposed the implementation of the Healthy Environmental Promotion Action, again putting forward detailed requirements for in-depth environmental and health work. So over the last 10 years, I think China has resolutely declared battles on pollution and implemented 3 action plans for the prevention and control of air, water, and soil pollution, thus solving a number of major environmental problems. On the whole, the quality of ecological environment has been improving steadily, while the Ministry of Environmental Protection is organizing some large pollution remediation projects similar to the US Superfund, and the demonstration ecological restoration projects have been launched. These cases show that the comprehensive treatment of existing polluted areas will require extremely expensive financial support. For the Chinese government, another incentive to tackle problems comes from a strong concern for social stability. All of these, along with the expansion of the space for public participation, bring hope to the solution of health problems caused by pollution and give impetus and resources to sustainable development. And the last one, I would like to take the case of the Fukushima nuclear power plant water discharging in Japan. Such kind of nearby issue or cases also happened in China and other countries. But nowadays, this case is quite hard for discussion in the academia here in China. The large-scale projects in human development are important, but also easily lead to nearby crises. And most of them need international co-governance and public participation. At present, nuclear radiation and potential human health risks remain the main concern for China and also other Asian countries. On April 13, 2021, the Japanese government held a cabinet meeting to formally finalize the policy of discharging nuclear wastewater from the Fukushima Daiichi nuclear power plant into the sea. So neighboring countries have expressed a grave concern over the Japanese government's official decision to dispose of nuclear wastewater from the Fukushima nuclear power plant. So the issue of nuclear wastewater disposal at the Fukushima nuclear power plant should be re-examined, and discharge should not be initiated without a full consultation and agreement with all stakeholders. And the international IAEA, Fukushima surrounding ocean is not only to the survival of the local fishermen grounds, it is also part of the global and the Pacific Ocean. Nuclear wastewater discharged into the ocean will affect the global migratory fishing, human health, ecological safety, and other aspects. So this problem is not just for Japan, one country's domestic problem, but involved in the global maritime, ecological, and environmental security. Here are some suggestions which from China's environmental and health response practice over the past years. And one is for to improve the information disclosure system. For a long time in history, the ways and means for information disclosure and public participation were extremely limited in China's history for, protecting environmental history. China's newly revised environmental protection law strengthened the legal paths and procedures for information disclosure and public participation. Therefore, it is necessary to establish a transparent and careful decision-making mechanism according to the requirement of the national modernization of the governance system and governance capacity. So these years, China do a lot for such kind of improvements for the environmental protection. And the second, to design a well thought out decision-making process. According to the latter theory of the public participation in NIMBA facility decision-making should emphasize power sharing. The public should enjoy full participation right in the establishment of NIMBA facilities. And if we can actively solicit public opinions at the early stage of the urban planning and other facilities, invite citizens in some planning areas to participate in the discussion and decision-making, government department will not be put into a passive and embarrassing situation at a later stage. And the third, to improve the multiple compensation and insurance mechanism. Compensation has also been regarded as an important means to solve NIMBY problems. It is necessary to establish a diversified and reasonable compensation mechanism and insurance mechanism to build a bridge between government behavior and citizen trust. So, of course, in view of the limitation of the compensation mechanism, it should be used as an auxiliary means to establish a compulsory environmental pollution insurance system for NIMBY facilities. The last one, to give full play to judicial relief mechanism. Taking the case of Fukushima with the water discharge, the impact of nuclear accident to human health cannot be clearly proved, but it does not mean that nuclear pollution does not pose a threat to human life and health. Under such circumstances, the Japanese government still plans to release contaminated water from Fukushima into sea by 2023. So this decision, which was not based on rigorous, significant scientific reasoning, was opposed by about 2070 of Fukushima residents. And the Japanese government's handling of Fukushima nuclear accident has long frustrated local people. And also, such kind of cases also happen in China. And some, like the power stations and in my provinces. So we should learn such lessons from our history. And however, at present, environmental public interest litigation can only be aimed at actions that pollute the environment, destroy the ecology, and harm the public interest of the society. That is the fact of environmental pollution. At the international level, for example, the wastewater discharge of Fukushima nuclear power plant has become a situation that may be polluted and damaged soon. And the object of international arbitration and regulation should be extended to this field. So I would like to close my presentation now, waiting for take the questions. Thank you so much.
Thank you for your presentation, Dr. Zhou. Can we have Dr. Jyoti M. Pathania next, please?
Okay. So a very good afternoon from India. It's indeed great and an honor to be part of the 6th NTS-Asia Consortium. And the topic I'm going to deal with today is India's environment and water security, planetary health, and assessment. So I'm going to cover my presentation in 3 parts. First, I'll talk about the conceptual understanding as to what do we mean by environment security, planetary health, water security. And most of the speakers have already covered it, so I'm going to not cover it in detail. Then I'm going to take the conceptual understanding and put it in the context of India and how do we fare in that. And then, of course, I move on to part 3 of my presentation, which talks about recommendations. Conceptual understanding. So the picture here, I think, says it all. You know, we share our planet and our home with millions of species. So justice and sustainability both demand that we do not use more resources than we actually need them. So need-based resource and judicious use of resources is something which we all have to cater to. The fundamental right to economic security should also include ecological and environment security. Because if you provide these 2 ingredients to the population, perhaps it will stabilize itself. India's leading environmentalist, Vandana Shiva, says, and allow me to quote her, "In nature's economy, the currency is not money, it is life." So the planetary health, as was said by the previous speaker, is not a new discipline. It is an extension of a concept which was understood by our ancestors, and it remains inseparable to human health. Planetary health, in fact, is inseparably bonded to human health. The term planetary health, in fact, originated roundabout during the health and the environmental movements in the 70s and 80s, but it was only the WHO definition of health in the 80s and 90s that the concept of health was expanded to include physical health, mental health, social, and most important, ecological well-being. So not merely absence of disease, but ecological well-being was what the WHO also quoted. Coming to the 21st century agenda, the 21st century agenda for the planetary health was also enunciated and declared in the Canmore Declaration of April 2018, which was the 7th WIVO meeting in Canmore, which was in Alberta in Canada in April 2018. So the most important thing that was said here was emotional bonds between people and the land, personal commitment to shaping new normative attitudes and behavior, and unity of purpose and recognition of biophysiological, sociological interdependence. Coming now to the next slide. So justice peace is not merely the cessation of war, but a positive ideal. So health is not merely the absence of disease. Now, taking what we understood as a concept and putting it across into the contextual understanding of India. As you all know, India is the 7th largest country in the world. It has about 2.4% of the total land area and supports 17% of the world's population. And India is one of the 12 mega diversity countries of the world, with 15% of livestock, and mind you, only 4% of water resources. And this is what I want to hint out in my next forthcoming slides. We all face multitude of non-traditional and traditional security challenges. We all know that. And both of these are complementary and reinforce each other. What does it happen? All this further intensifies the vulnerability of the region. There are very issues like water scarcity, poverty, which is affecting all of us. And what are the governments seem to be doing? Have they fully prioritized combating non-traditional security threats like environmental degradation, which affects millions of us? No. Most of us, and I'm talking about the Indian governments, they are primarily still today, they are clinging on to traditional, non-traditional national security issues, which are related to conventional warfare. But is the government to be blamed? The circumstances are such that you need to poise a middle path wherein you do give impetus to non-traditional security threats. Now, this is a map which shows that how the high emission scenario, and this is with regard to South Asia and India in particular, you see how the central part of the India from moderate to high emission scenario is going to reach by 2050. And it's going to impact the livelihood of staggering 800 million people. And this is an alarming risk which global warming is going to pose in terms of ecological disturbances and environmental degradation. So primarily there were two major reports, international reports, which talked about the same. The Global Risk Report 2020, it said that out of the 10 global risks, 5 of them were related to environment and nature, which shows the enormity of the problem. And another one was the IPCC panel 2021, where it particularly stated that India's extreme flooding and extreme weather conditions and melting mountains is something which we are going to see. So what is the cause and what is the effect? The causes are, of course, human-induced disturbances and which is the affected party, is of course the human resources and humans. Misuse of technology, illicit transnational activities do what? They induce development, which is lopsided, and it sometimes stagnates. So what do the illicit transnational activities like poaching, deforestation, what does it do? In India, sometimes, in fact, most of the time, it does lead to room for a softer threats, which thrive. Excessive use of natural resources also lead to national security threats. The rapid growing population in India has led to 60% of arable land which suffers today because of environmental degradation, thanks to the rapidly growing poor population and misappropriation of natural resources. Deforestation, 2.5 million acres per year. What has it led to? Massive soil erosion, flooding, and pollution. These are the 5 guarantees which India has done to climate action. How much and how soon is for you to gauge, and for us, the path to success is this, which says it reduces carbon intensity of economy by less than 45% by 2030. So these are idealistic goals, but as long as we move towards it, it's good. Now, India's water crisis, and I'm going to just stick on to the groundwater crisis. India ranks 133 out of 180 nations in terms of water availability. It ranks 120 out of 122 nations for its water quality. 80% of India's water surface is polluted, which results in India losing around about $6 billion per year due to water-related diseases. And to amplify what I'm saying, I would like to show you the next slide.
Groundwater is India's water lifeline. It has been India's water lifeline for last 4 decades at least. This is in all subsectors, including irrigation, rural drinking, domestic water supply, the urban domestic water supply, and also industrial and commercial water use. On the whole, the groundwater situation is deteriorating pretty fast in large number of areas.
Did you know that 85% of India's villages and small towns depend on groundwater for their drinking and everyday chores? But what is groundwater? Groundwater is essentially fresh water found at a depth of approximately 5 to 20 meters below the ground. It makes 30% of the world's freshwater supply. But India has a real problem when it comes to groundwater. We're simply using too much of it and withdrawing it at a rate that is higher than replenishment. It makes India the most groundwater-stressed region in the world. Globally, irrigation of crops sucks 70% of available fresh water. In dry countries like Chile and Sudan, 90% of fresh water is used to irrigate farmland. And in India, over 50% of all irrigation-linked freshwater withdrawals are from groundwater reserves. Groundwater is primarily recharged in the monsoon months from June to September. But precipitation levels vary substantially, with India's western region receiving less than 600 millimeters of rainfall. And as a result, Rajasthan, Punjab, Haryana, and Delhi are classified as critical regions having overexploited stages of groundwater extraction, especially since most of these are intensively cultivated areas, withdrawing high levels of groundwater. But India's northeast states extract the least groundwater, less than 12%.
There is not sufficient electricity access to large parts of Northeast India, particularly in rural areas. It's still more tribal dominated and traditional farming practices that are followed there, and hence they don't really use that much water. It's a relatively high rainfall area where there are still a very large number of local water systems existing, which provide water for the irrigation to some extent.
So these places are considered non-critical in terms of groundwater depletion. States that extract less than 50% groundwater are also considered safe. These include West Bengal, Chhattisgarh, and Tripura. But those like Tamil Nadu, Uttar Pradesh, and Himachal Pradesh, which extract more than 50% of their groundwater, are semi-critical. However, groundwater in India is not uniformly usable either. The semi-arid western region and the coastlines have a high prevalence of groundwater salinity. In addition, a total of 213 districts across 19 states have unhealthy levels of fluoride in groundwater. That may cause fluorosis, which affects teeth and bones. So how can we solve the problem of overuse of groundwater?
We have to also regulate groundwater use. The regulation of the groundwater should also be at the aquifer based. And that means it has to happen decentralized way, starting from the watershed village level and then federating up from there. If we, empower the people at the village level, at the ward level, to understand what is the groundwater, how does the groundwater regulation should happen, I think the people will get connected, people will feel connected with the whole issue. They will get empowered to get connected and regulate the groundwater use at the local level. And then they will also protect the groundwater recharge system. They'll possibly enhance them. For example, desilting of the local tanks at the village level and so on, rivers and streams and so on. So this is the way forward, I feel.
So what the video was trying to show was basically the India's groundwater resource. How and what does the Indian government have to do with regard to groundwater resource? What are the resources? What are the policy planning it had to do? Was primarily one most important mission that was launched in 2019 was the Jal Jeevan mission, where it was huge budget was used. But the fact of the matter is that the 12th time India has set such a deadline, but has not been able to meet up. So policies, plannings is at one side and implementation is at the other side. So what are the security implications for the environment and water security? There are many, and I have just named few of them. It has a potential to exacerbate insurgencies. And why do I say that? Critical infrastructures, public health systems. What did we see in Northeast and areas of central India, where left-wing extremism, ecologically sensitive regions were also very, very important. And why do I say that? Because climate stress plus weak state capacity leads to deterioration in the livelihoods. And that is why insurgency, because of underdevelopment of resources. So water stress and land degradation in dry land agrarian regions has impacted the small farmers. As a result, many of those are interlinked with the left-wing extremism actions in central India. There is an increased amount of human and wildlife interaction which arises from natural habitat loss. And as a result, new zootonic diseases are for us to bear with. As we have seen, epidemic-induced public health crisis, national security issues. The reason today we are talking online is, of course, the credit goes to the epidemic also. So the high population density and limited public health management capacity, all this is exacerbated because of the catastrophic issues which pandemic raises. There is risk of adversarial state and non-state actors' disinformation campaigns, which are intensifying panic and discontent, which arises from any public health emergency and internal instability. So what are the recommendations? Now, a couple of them, but I'm just going to give you three. Under three verticals. First, whom should we pay heed to now? Environment security and water crisis. Why? Because environment security encapsulates air pollution, water pollution, you just name climate change, everything, most of the thing is encapsulated under environment security. Societal issues and human security needs are also to be met. How? When you have visionary policymakers who have the will to enforce the decisions, but the inaction cost is unbearable now. So action has to be taken. So climate resilience is the word which I would stress. It would strengthen societies, economies, ecosystem with greater synergies and convergences. Environmental health and health ministries should collaborate with joint agendas for a green recovery. COVID-19 pandemic showed us about the interconnected world and, of course, the zootonic virus, wildlife, and human interrelatedness, which showed the universe is all molecular universe. We have to break down all our silos and integrate the policy and programming. So this is a formula which perhaps during my research, I just thought I'd share it with you, that ES plus WS is PH. And that means environment security plus water security should give us a holistic amount of planetary health, but this is not enough. This should become a fundamental right of all the citizens of the planet, a fundamental right for us to see that our planet and our Mother Earth thrives. Thank you. Terima kasih.
Thank you very much. But now can I please have Ms. Novia Su to do your presentation, please.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Novia. I'm a researcher at Center for Strategic and International Studies in Jakarta. So today, thank you for the opportunity to speak to you all. I'm going to share what I observed on Indonesia's climate actions and how it linked to human health and also planetary health as a whole. So as a background, I think we all agree that we are facing a multiple planetary crisis. But if we look closer into the core, we can say that climate change is influencing all of this crisis at the same time. It is undeniable that human activities based on the fossil fuel combustion have increased the CO2 concentration in our atmosphere by 49% since the start of Industrial Revolution in 1850. And observed warming rate is high, is unprecedented in at least the last 2,000 years. And I know that here says that the CO2 concentration in the atmosphere is 418 parts per million since January 2022. But this morning I checked, and in 4th of April, it's 420 parts per million. It's crazy how fast it's growing, even though we know that there is a multiple initiative for green recovery post-pandemic. And we also see that the impacts from climate change are not isolated. We can see that the warming has happened across the globe, from America, Europe, Africa, and also Asia. And the observed surface warming have reached 1.2 degrees Celsius, and the impact has been identified on various aspects of life. And even though Paris Agreement says all the nations in Paris Agreement have agreed to limit the temperature rise at 2 degrees Celsius and trying their best effort to keep at 1.5 degrees Celsius, it is not safe to say that we are free from the climate impacts. WRI has made a very good figure to compile all the risk from rising temperature based on the IPCC report. And here it says at 1.5 degrees Celsius, we still face a biodiversity loss risk, with 14% of the species are at high risk of extinction. And this 14% is only depict of forest and land species, and they're not even comprised of underwater life. And at 1.5 degrees Celsius as well, we can see more higher cost of drought and on food security. And with the warming climate as well, more frequent and also higher magnitude of fires and extreme heat that has direct cost to human life, and also floodings and also sea level rise. And I really like this figure from WHO which summarize very good linkage between climate change to human life and human health. And between those two is the vulnerability factors that mention vulnerability is not only just from the health perspective, but in this whole system perspective. For example, due to demographic factors, geographic and socioeconomic factors that feed into how we are exposed to climate change impacts and how we are vulnerable towards it. And also, on the other hand as well, in the other side as well, the health system capacity shows how we can be adaptive towards it and how we are having the capacity to respond towards the climate change. And here also it lists a very extensive health outcomes that are climate sensitive. And I really like how they also include mental health inside of the health outcome, because it's a very, it's now increasingly important to see how our mental health influenced by climate change. And I'm not dwelling too much into what causes the most death in the global sense, but I just want to show the example of Indonesia's case. Here it shows that since 2009 to 2019, Indonesia has shifted the causes of the death from the communicable diseases to non-communicable diseases, and this is very much linked towards what happened in the environment and how we consume and our diet, for example. And just to see in closer look for the vulnerable factors, Indonesia, around 250 million people are very prone to disaster, because 97% of Indonesia's population lives in the disaster-prone areas, with more than 60% of the hazard related to earthquake. And also inequality and poor living conditions are also undermined the determinants for good health. For example, we are very prone to airborne and also waterborne diseases because, for example, a very bad ventilation in the houses, and also exacerbating the double burden of stunting, for example, on top of increasing health expenditure due to malnutrition. Indonesians' population, especially the poor one, they also has to suffer from reduced productivity due to reduced cognitive development due to the stunting conditions, and also unequal access to healthcare, and also lack of social support systems make families, and especially the poor ones, stays in poverty, especially in the wake of health crises such as COVID-19. And on the other hand, the health system capacity and also resilience also shows that Indonesia fall behind from other counterparts. For example, in the the Universal Health Coverage Effective Index, it shows that Indonesia in 2019 only have the index 48.7%, while the average is at 60. It's fall behind, and also the capacity in the healthcare sector itself, for example, compared to Malaysia or even Philippines, for example, Indonesia still fall behind. So what is the key to get out of this is we have to reduce our vulnerability towards the climate change, but there is no silver bullet. In here, I see that it shows that there are two ways to respond towards this. It is to do the mitigation and also to do the adaptation, but we cannot choose one and then not doing the other. We have to do both, and at the same time, at the front loading part and in the very short and rapid timeline. So Indonesia initiative so far has been very in line with the global trend. Indonesia's commit to reduce 29% of its greenhouse gas emission based on business as usual with our own effort, or up to 41% with international assistance by 2030. And on top of that, Indonesia also seek to achieve net zero emission by 2060 or sooner. I'm sorry. However, progress is rated very insufficient. Now, at this level, we are still in line towards the warming almost 3%, 3 degrees Celsius, and it's very, very insufficient towards what we have agreed on in Paris Agreement. That is because of why I see that Indonesia's economy is still very dependent on fossil fuel, and it also the national energy mix doesn't support the decarbonization goal as well. If we see here, more than 75% is still based on fossil fuel, our energy mix, and only 23% is allocated for new and renewables. Even though I see that new and renewables may pose some problems later, because it is unclear how we decompose the new, which is based on biomass fuel, versus the renewables, the solar, wind, or hydro, because new energy sources has a potential to cause more environmental degradation too, such as they still emit greenhouse gas emission and also put burden on land use for industrial production. And also fossil fuel prices, we can see now are skyrocketing, which can be seen as a reason for a decarbonization, especially when we see that variable cost for renewable energy power is literally zero. Although if you consider the cost of building the power plant itself, but building the fossil fuel power plant also costs money. And the technological cost for renewables has drastically reduced over time and keep reducing in the future. And also that will pose some significant consideration for carbon locked in and how potential of stranded assets will happen in the future, especially when fossil fuel become obsolete. And also with the rising prices, we can see that it add to energy subsidy burden, especially for Indonesia, where Indonesia still gives subsidy, a large sum of subsidy for fossil fuels, and also at the same time, we are also net oil importer. And the subsidy, we can see it disinfantilize the decarbonization process by giving an uneven level playing field for renewables, and also subsidy mask the economic value of energy at the time of the price fluctuation and uncertainty in the global economy. And also we can see that in the future, there is still potential for energy prices, especially fossil fuel prices, to continue to increase, given the fact that it is very limited. And also fossil fuel supply chains are are vulnerable towards disruption due to geopolitical issues, as we see with the conflict between Ukraine and Russia. And then we can see that how we get out of this is through electrification. So electrification, we see as the key in the transition towards the renewables, but it is very, it is not yet optimal. In the case of Indonesia, electricity is still a very monopoly and also monopsony market. And consequently, public market depends to sole institution and its state-owned enterprises as well. And the incentive for the institution is greatly influence the success of the energy transition. And we also see that there is an inadequate integration between the regional electrification policies. As we see here, the map of Indonesia is it's a very maritime. So most of the economic concentration is in Java Island, where it's very high cost service delivery towards, like, for example, in Papua, from Java to Papua. And there is also still, we don't have a comprehensive law on renewable energy. For example, if we have this law on renewable energy, we can propose the incentives for decarbonization for the SOEs, and we can also put in a financing scheme that can de-risk the renewable projects. For example, provide guarantee from the government, and also we can improve the coordination between government agencies, especially between central and also regional governments, to improve the electrification in Indonesia. And also, lastly, the policies for energy efficiencies are not yet optimal. We can still say that it's very new, so it has not been properly or largely enforced. And also we can see that there is a tendency of aging grid infrastructure in Indonesia. So there is no proper management and also maintenance. As a result, there is a lot of energy losses in the distribution. So another part of it is carbon pricing. We see that carbon pricing will be the one of the reliable instrument in the energy transition in Indonesia. So Indonesia has put in the law to enforce carbon tax. It is supposed to be imposed in 1st of April, but it got postponed into July 2022. The impose of carbon tax will be gradually, will gradually imposed or introduced with ongoing evaluation, with a tariff of 30,000 rupiah per ton, or around $2 US dollars per ton of CO2 emissions. And it will be firstly imposed on bodies engaged in coal-fired power plants, and will be evaluated later on. And it will use the cap and tax scheme. And also the benefits will be distributed through state budget. The introduction of carbon tax will become the addition towards how we Indonesia develop the carbon trading market. And then on top of all this, Indonesia also has to prepare a strategies to face the rising trend of global climate policies. So as an example, we can see here in the EU, they propose the carbon border adjustment measures, and also put on a regulation on deforestation-free products. So they want to regulate what they consume through imports. And Indonesia, as an open and engaged with the global community countries, we have to anticipate the implications for Indonesia, and we have to formulate strategies to minimize the impacts of it, because we know that Indonesia are still not competitive, and we still need a lot of assistance in our development agenda. And we also need to seize the opportunity to fill the sustainable global value chain, because this opportunity are rising, and Indonesia has a lot of resources to tap on this opportunity. And we must shift our thinking to not only pursue economic value added, but also achieve the decarbonization target goal in the process of it. So we have two options, and we have to think which one is more sustainable. The first one, obviously, is to be defensive. And I can say that I see a lot of defensive approach from Indonesia's side towards this rising climate-related threat measures, for example. And we are arguing that other alternative product also has a very similar low sustainability criteria, for example, compared to our palm oil. And then we also argue that different definition is what we are using. And we claim that our action is not environmentally damaging as claimed by by other countries. And obviously, we also have the second option, which is we are open to reform, and we can use this chance, this opportunity, to improve our sustainability standards in the production and also the consumption process. And at the same time, we have to promote a more quality reporting and also evaluation system. So in short, we have to try to show to the policymakers that proactive approach is better than the reactive one, because right now we see there is a lot of reactions and not prepared strategies. And also at the same time, and I think this is a very important one, is human capital. Human capital is very important.
Sorry, Ms. Siu, can I just get you to quickly round up the presentation?
Yes, I'm coming to the end. And also in the process itself, we have to improve the capacity for the policymakers, and also we have to seize the opportunity that labor demand is very high for green economy. And we have to think how to retrain and also reskill our effective workforce. And also education about the environment and also disaster is very important. We can do it through formal education or informal education, make use of the community leaders and also religious leaders. And I think tank or also university play a very important role here with translating the science into the public knowledge, and also from that they can grow into public movement and then translate it into public policies. And also we have to understand that time is of the essence. So no longer delay. So what if we fail? There are only two, I think there are two impacts that we can consider: impacts from the ecological collapse itself, and also impacts from strategic implications. For example, we are disconnected from the global economy, and also we lost the economic opportunity from these green transitions. So I think this is to conclude, climate change should be seen as an integral part of the biggest threat facing humanity, be it on human health or the economy. It is a planetary problem, and I think it needs planetary solutions as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Siu. Now, can I please get Professor Tomonori Yoshizaki to give his presentation? The floor is yours, Professor.
Thank you very much for invitations, and hello from Tokyo. And I think this is the third time to speak for the RISS, the NTS workshop. Thank you very much for having me. And could I share the screen with you? Okay. Again, thank you very much for having me. I'm Vice President of National Institute for Defense Studies, and this post is quite new to me. I was assigned the last Friday, so only 1 week in this position. But previously, I was a director of policy simulation, thinking about the unthinkable type of things. And today, I'm so happy to talk about non-traditional security challenges and COVID-19 and Japan's perspective on Japan, ASEAN, or Japan regional cooperation to counter this kind of the thinking about the unthinkable or black swan situations. Okay, let me start. This is a snapshot of 2 years back. We had Diamond Princess, big cruiser, and we have this boat in Yokohama Harbor for about 1 month to counter the COVID-19. But please note that it was the January 13th. So that was the first initial kind of foreign responses to COVID. And now you can see the 2 trucks of the self-defense forces, the trucks providing the medical care and injections or PCR test. But again, this was a February and March of back in 2020, the 2 years back. So we had less image and knowledge about how to counter these black swan situations. We had about 3,700 personnel to counter these unknown unknowns. Then this picture gives you some snapshot. We have a regular so-called capacity building project with ASEAN 10 countries, including Singapore. And we have so-called the HADR, Humanitarian Assistance and Disaster Relief Operation exercises here in Tokyo. But in these 2 years, we couldn't do it due to pandemics. Now, I was and I am responsible for organizing this kind of tabletop simulations with ASEAN members. You can see the militaries of the ASEAN 10 members, on how to counter this kind of COVID or humanitarian assistance and disaster relief operations. But this reality is that we have to do it online, not face-to-face. That is the way we are. Okay, so let me limit myself talking about Japan's self-defense forces activities to counter the so-called humanitarian assistance and disaster relief operation. I believe we have an impact of so-called planetary health consideration on concept from non-traditional security perspective, because you can see the military is was designed, and it is designed to counter traditional security challenges like a Ukraine situation this time. But now, today, we are talking more about kind of regional impact and planetary health concept. So I'm so happy to elaborate the concept to counter this kind of multiple challenges. And these are the discussion point for today. So I will talk about Japan's own soft power concept, focusing on humanitarian assistance and disaster relief and healthcare issues. And then I will call it soft power of Japan based upon our national disaster management. We had the full-fledged support from the public. Then I will conclude with the current challenges of COVID, and I would like to share with you. Okay, first, let me start with numbers. Japanese public support to the self-defense forces operation on disaster management, or HADR, is extremely good. Please look at the number, and on the top, this is the newest number, but the question we ask every 4 years is that, what is the most useful mission of the self-defense forces? And the number one priority of the public is the disaster relief, disaster management, not the security consideration like North Korean ICBM, missile testing, or Chinese fishery board, blah, blah, blah. No, disaster relief and management. You can see about more than 80% Japanese public see that this is the most crucial for self-defense forces. That's, I should say, kind of the quite unique number, because Japanese public think that this kind of disaster relief is traditional operation, traditional mission for self-defense forces, not Army, Navy type of things. This is quite unique. Why? We have so many natural disasters, including not that natural disaster, but the disaster like COVID. And you can see that the Great Eastern earthquake 11 years back. And the previous speaker touched on the Fukushima nuclear power plant. And I was lucky to have a tour to oversee the Fukushima #1 power plant. And it is a very tough moment still. And we have to muddle through, and burdens are huge. But I can say these things. This is nationwide, very serious damage, not only Fukushima itself, but Tokyo and many Fukushima area still. But the issue is that the Japanese public see self-defense forces as a first responder to this kind of nation-level disaster like Fukushima nuclear things. let me go next slide. Why? Well, in general, we can say that the roles of the military in disaster relief operation can be listed like this. Military have information, ready budget, logistic support, personnel, equipment, heavy equipment, infrastructure, protection of the people, and the decision mechanism is top-down, quite speedy. But the most crucial, I believe, is the last one, stability on site. Reassuring the people who are affected by disaster like a nuclear power plants or the earthquake or tsunami. So we were there to reassure people. That is critical. Then next one is a regional planetary impact of this kind of HADR. We believe that the HADR training and lesson learned are critical to think about the planetary healthcare or regional cooperation like today, because it is easy to go into disaster and quagmire and having a kind of Ukraine situation. Protection with civilian is always a challenge because military has missiles, tanks, and also many military equipment which can easily kill innocent civilian. So the idea of Japanese, the HADR, is depoliticize these kind of operations. That means military must be the last resort. And in order to ensure kind of the safety and reassurance of the affected people based upon self-defense forces experiences, that's our take. So we say normative power in the multilateral security architecture like ASEAN is critical, and UN and many other regional sites is critical. And then why we have this kind of the tabletop simulations or the capacity building? Because we should have a cluster approaches based upon UN model and how to maximize the impact of the humanitarian activities upon the people and local community affected by the disaster. So we need to coordinate these local first responder like a police, firefighter, and then the ministries, UN agencies, regional organization, NPOs. The idea is, okay, slow down and depoliticize, and protection of civilian or people, affected people, is a #1 priority. And the idea is depoliticize the issues and get the maximum impact from humanitarian perspectives. That's my take. So in that sense, Japan's support to the ASEAN on HADR is a soft power, and self-defense forces should be regarded as a force for good. So in this sense, capacity building assistance incorporate the concept of achieving long-term development for enhanced national regional resilience, focusing on including planetary healthcare. Okay, let me conclude with this slide. So this is where we are, and self-defense forces was a first responder in the encounter the Diamond Princess cruiser back in January, February 2020, because we had no idea how to do with that. And please look at the picture. This is Japanese public queuing for vaccination provided by self-defense forces. And please believe me that I went there, and it is very close to the Tokyo station. That means that this is the center of the metropolitan capital. Can you believe that? So this is a symbol that we try to open up and welcome welcome the people to have a kind of reassurance. So providing the reassurance so far is very promising and successful. But we need to go back to basics. Ministry of Health, Labor, Welfare is now fully in charge. So the idea is that the self-defense forces was the kind of first responder as to the Diamond Princess accident, as you say, and also have a structured cooperations in center of the metropolitan capital of Tokyo. But now we are going back to basics, and this will lead to kind of the peacetime operation by Japanese government. I will stop here, and thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Professor. Yes? Okay. Dr. Cho had to leave the session. His apologies, he's tied up with something else, so he won't be around to take your questions, but the rest of our panelists are. So can I just start with the first round of questions?
I think there's a question in the Q&A in Zoom.
Yes. So we'll just go with the floor first. Any questions from the floor? Yes, Al.
Thanks. My question is to all the panelists, but we heard specifically about it from Novia, and that was the turn of phrase anticipatory actions, basically. So I'm wondering what the panelists think about anticipatory action and its place within the planetary health framework. So primarily to Novia.
Novia, okay. So we have that question, and then we have one more question from the chat, which I'm just going to read. It's addressed to all the panelists. So it's got 3 parts. So hang on, here it comes. Okay. So based on the case studies that you all cited in your presentation, A, who do you think should know about planetary health concept? So I assume that which actor should know about this most. B, what do you think can hinder the adaptation of planetary health concept by the actors that you identified in A? And C, how do you think the application of planetary health concept can help fix gaps identified in your case studies? So that's for all the panelists. So I think we can, Novia, would you like to start first? And then we can go down the list for the second question.
Thank you for the questions. Anticipatory actions within planetary health. This is what I briefly pan out within my presentation, that actually we have to be more proactive rather than reactive towards it. Disclaimatory, I'm not a health expert and also not a health economist, but I have a quite understanding about how the economy works within, especially within the international economy framework. And I can say that most of the developing countries, such as Indonesia, we are kind of buying towards reactive approach rather than proactive, or you say anticipatory actions. For example, Indonesia, they don't have any strategy how to face the rising threat measures related to climate change. And also within the COVID-19 as well, we don't really see how we can allocate our resources more, like divide our resources into health, into education. We don't really have the capacity. Also, we don't have the resources to do so. That is why I think in this year, G20 Indonesia presidency proposed to have a more concrete actions into a resource pooling, and that's why from there we can allocate better into the resources, and then we can fix or kind of design a whole approach into preparedness and also prevention, rather than fixing stuff when it's come up, or when we hit the health crisis, for example. I know this is not a very comprehensive answers. I'm still also wrapping up my head around these issues and also around this concept of planetary health. And I think Indonesia will do better, not alone, but together within ASEAN or even South Asia as well.
Thank you, Ms. Su. So can all the panelists take the second question, and we will start with Dr. Dhanasri, and then Dr. Jyoti, Ms. Su, and then Professor Tomonori. So Dr. Dhanasri, can we hear from you first, please?
Yeah, thank you for the question, Margaret. Who are the actors who need to know about planetary health concept? I think everyone needs to know about it because almost all actors need to be part of the solution. It needs to be like a whole of government and whole of society approach, both. So I don't think it can be something where some actors need to be more influential, or some actors need to have the solutions in place while others don't have much of a say in how these actions or how these policies are formulated, or just framing the concept itself. So I think in that sense, I don't think I would say some actors would be more influential. But yes, in most of the contexts, like including that of India, some ministries and some government agencies and some governments, like at different levels of governance, have more powers on these issues. So whether when it comes to environmental issues, your Ministry of Environment, Forests and Climate Change. You also have a Ministry of Health, which decides most of the issues related to health-related issues. So so in that sense, it is a siloed approach. But I think what needs to be done is that all these different agencies and actors need to come together. And in that sense, as I mentioned, I think this is a concept which has to come also from the bottom up. So I don't think just the governments and others need to take cognizance of these issues. The individuals, the societies, the communities also have to come on board as such. So I wouldn't say like who should be the actor. So I mean, some of the examples that I mentioned, like say for instance, air pollution is one of them, or water pollution is another one. Dr. Jyoti also talked about water security, right? So I mean, think about over extraction of groundwater. Now, this is something that also has to come from the industrial users, agricultural users, and others who are excessively drawing water from the ground. So this is not just about the government regulations and other things, but it's also something that needs to change with behavioral patterns and things like that. Who do you think can hinder the adoption? Again, it depends on, as I mentioned, there are always competing interests. Environment versus development is like I would say, although, there's been a change in that perception that both need to go hand in hand, but that is mostly in just saying, right? So still development is given priority, which is why a lot of regulations are still being diluted or are being sidelined or, all of that. I mean, one of the actors which I think I did not mention in my presentation is also the judiciary, right? So when we talk about environmental litigations and public interest litigations in India, the judiciary has played a big role in ensuring, say, right to life and the fundamental rights of the people. So I think in that sense, something like the Green Tribunal, which India has set up, has been successful to some extent. But like I mentioned, competing interests will always come in the way. So developmental priorities or actors with different interests, like lobbies and mining companies, for instance, all these different companies or other actors would have different interests, which would come in the way of the adoption of such of a planetary health approach. And how do you think the application of planetary health concept can help fix the gaps? And that's very clear that when we link these issues, right? So when we adopt, say, an initiative, there are sometimes even unintended consequences of that action, right? So this is where even anticipatory governance comes into place. That you bring into place some mitigation projects, adaptation projects, without really taking care of how this will affect different communities or how it affects the local level governance, right? So this is where anticipation does come into picture, and this is where I think, I mean, this is not the only place where it comes into picture. Like Novia mentioned, there are various places, but then it's important that these gaps in governance, like take the example of disasters itself. It has cascading risks associated with it. But there's always like a reactive approach. Okay, relief and rescue is given prioritization for obvious reasons. But beyond that, how do you rebuild lives and infrastructure, right? Do you take a planetary health approach when you rebuild, like we are talking about green, green recovery from COVID-19? How much of it is going to be implemented, and how much of it is only in paper? Right. So this is a question, which we need to ask ourselves, and this is where the gaps can be filled. Especially when we think about issues that are interconnected with each other, and when we think of these cascading impacts, in particular with respect to what is happening with climate change and associated risks, it's important that we have a planetary approach. So yeah, so in that sense, it can fix the gaps. But at the same time, as I mentioned, when it comes to knowledge, when it comes to implementation, and there is always power and agency. We cannot forget that. So in terms of power and agency, if some actors are given more influence while others are sidelined or marginalized, then it can actually create more problems than it originally envisaged. So we need to take that into consideration. We need to keep different players and different stakeholders, at the same time different people who have rights to whatever we are talking about. They need to be on the table. Otherwise, yeah, this is going to create further power hierarchies and further problems in governance in the future. Yeah.
Thank you, Dr. Dhanasri. Dr. Jyoti, your thoughts, please.
Yeah. Thank you for the question. I think Dr. Dhanasri has already covered most of the things, but to add on to it, it's the Indian Constitution, as per the Directive Principles of State Policy, Article 48A, states that the state shall endeavor to protect and improve its environment and safeguard forest life. Article 51A again states that it shall be the duty of every citizen in India to protect and improve the national security, the national environment. That's not enough. In order for environment security or water security to fully percolate down to the people, you not only need whole of government approach, you need to prioritize. For instance, if we are talking about groundwater recovery, who are the people who are getting affected by groundwater recovery? It is the farmers. As to 60 to 70% of the India's agricultural land is farming land. So if the groundwater gets finished, how are they going to replenish their farms? That's the basic question. So one has to, prioritize which areas need first planning. Not only planning, but implementation on ground. Whole of government approach, certainly. Citizens, certainly. But is it actually happening on ground? The NGOs themselves are taking upon the work which the government agencies should have done long time back. Because I'm not blaming anybody, but what I'm trying to say is that you need to prioritize. What does India do when its national security challenges are increasing? When territorial aggression is being done on India, when there's proxy war terrorism happening, at the same time, we are putting in resources for environmental security, for water security, ground degradation. So the resources of the government, the policies and plannings of the government, take a streamline, or they move towards first protecting your own territorial frontiers. And so the traditional security issues become predominant over the non-traditional security issues. So it is interwoven, it is intermixed. So I feel one needs to prioritize that at this stage, what is the most important thing in non-traditional security which is affecting our country. And it's just not our country, we are all interlinked. So it's the South Asian region, it's the world at large, and that's how the whole concept of planetary health. And I think the COVID pandemic has been a leveler also, and at the same time, it has shown the world that we are all unequal to quite an extent. So I guess in my presentation also I had given a formula that environment security plus water security is equal to planetary health, and this should become a fundamental right of every citizen, not only of India, I think in each and every country, because the government also needs to act and the people also need to abide by those governmental acts, because we are the sufferers. The people are the ones who are suffering the most. And I feel we, in our own unique ways, in our own homes, we need to start conservation, be it water, be it electricity, be it air. I think I'll rest my case there.
Thank you, Dr. Jyoti. Ms. Su, can we hear from you, please?
Yes, thank you. I completely agree with Dr. Jyoti and also Ms. Dana, I think. Yeah, I agree that everyone should know about planetary health, but allow me to also link it to what the hindrance to this concept is. Political will always play a significant part of it. So people in the government should internalize this concept into their interest and also their policy-making process. The major part is to get the climate action right? So we know right now net zero target is a big jargon everywhere. But the question remains is how to get the net zero right? So what the factors should be considered in the process, and etc. So for example, that the actions should be front-loading and no more waiting time, for example, because like we see nowadays, government always say that, oh, for example, Indonesia, oh, we cannot do much in this time because we don't have resources. So we will continue burn coal, we will continue to degrade our land for this biomass production, for example. But then to see the implementation itself, we should also consider a wider perspective. In this sense, we are talking about the more like major public interest here. So education is very important. So we should educate the public, and it is one of the core action that we need to emphasize further. Because right now, if we compare environmental or health issues to other issues, such as economic issues, the issues of environment and health and well-being, for example, are deemed as the least important issues because it is perceived as a problem of the future. Taking the work that we are doing at CSIS, for example, we survey 2,000 respondents to see voters' tendency during the 2009 election, and the survey result came out that only 1.6% of the respondents see that environmental issues as an important one and should have internalized by the government or the future government to be in the policy making process, like to be like the center of the policy. I'm looking forward towards the next election process election cycle, and we will try to update these kind of questions and to see how Indonesian public perceive environmental issues on top of the other issues. So I think public as a whole and also government specifically should really understand about this concept of planetary health in the policy making.
Thank you, Ms. Su. Professor, can we hear your thoughts on this, please?
Okay, thank you very much. And let me respond to your question in 3 parts. Number 1 is what is hindering international corporations? And second one is who should know and what we can do. The third one is the key to success in these situations. The first one, what hinders corporations, especially in the kind of the disaster management or international corporations. My answer is quite simple. Strategic competitions. Traditional rivalry is back. Now we see Ukraine situations. We have many layers of sanctions, financial, economy, energy, and that means who is with us, who is not, who is like-minded or not. This spirit, that is the lack of mutual trust, is a kind of the emerging threat to the international corporations. So what who hinders? Well, strategic rivalry is unfortunately is back. And this is a reality. This is number 1. Number 2 is that black swan situation is everywhere. So that means we should know that COVID-19, the Ukraine situations, this is part of our international politics. So the reality is that this connectivity, not the connectivity, and the sidelining of the non-traditional security challenges, unfortunately. So we should know that the reality. Then, final points, what we should do. My answer to this challenge is adaptation. Adaptation is this dramatic change should be the key to success. For example, digital transformations, remote connectivity like today, and then we should have much more structured corporations based upon common will or common procedure. Like we have a tabletop simulation online. Initially, it was not that very successful. Now we have much better impact based upon manuals, SOPs, how to do it better in online. That will ensure connectivity back to the basics. So that means hybrid conference like today is a very good example of the face-to-face direct conversation plus online kind of the Tokyo's input from HADR perspective may have some kind of implication for you to think more about the prospect of connectivity back in place. I will stop here. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So can I open the floor for the next round of questions, please, if any? Yes.
So thank you for all your insightful presentations. I have a question for all the members of the panel. And this with regards to the situation of deforestation in your country, because you know forests are really important as sources of water, as well as a solution to air pollution. So I'm just wondering whether or not you also face a serious problem of deforestation in your country.
Thank you. Was there another question? Yes, Louis, go ahead.
Oh, thank you, Tamara. My question is about food security related trade-offs in pursuing sustainability initiatives. For instance, within India, the funding that is used for supporting the shift towards non-renewables, some say could have been allocated for addressing undernourishment, which is above global average. So in terms of balancing future and present day priorities. Thank you.
Thank you, Louis. Yes, one more question.
Thank you. This is a general question to the panelists. We have an audience of academic and policy worlds. I'm just wondering if they could perhaps give their key message for the academic community in terms of the value of planetary health, and what would be their key message to the policy world in terms of its benefit for policy making, the term planetary health. Thank you.
Thank you.
Tamara, I have one more question.
Sorry. Yes, go ahead, please.
Just now, we talked about the who is going to like promote the idea and who or what kind of factors can hinder the use of the concept. I noticed that national agencies were mentioned, international cooperation was also mentioned. And then what about like regional mechanisms or regional organizations? Is there a role for these level of actor at all? Yeah, that's my question.
Thank you, Lena.
For all our panelists, thanks.
Thank you, Lena. So we have 4 questions, one on deforestation, one on food security, one on academia and policy, the policy world, and one on regional organizations. So we'll take we'll go in the order that you've presented. So we'll start with Dr. Dhanasri, followed by Dr. Jyoti, Misu, and Professor Tamanori. So could we start with Dr. Dhanasri? The first question on deforestation, please.
Yeah, okay. So about deforestation in India, yeah, thank you for the question, first of all. So recently, actually, there was a lot of controversy around how forests are measured, first of all, in India. I think we need to start from there. Because what is forest? I think the definition of forest itself is very controversial because, if you consider urban forests, plantations as forests, then there is a huge problem in the policy and how we define, forests. So in that sense, we need to start with understanding understanding the metrics to decide what are forests. But in other ways, yes, deforestation has increased over a period of time. The governments have, successive governments have talked about reducing deforestation, and also under the Paris Agreement. In fact, one of the goals of the Indian government is to enhance afforestation, to enhance carbon sinks, basically, which would also contribute to our net zero commitments, which is supposed to be achieved by 2070. So deforestation has definitely increased, and which has given way to plantations in many places. Extractive industries have also led to a lot of deforestation. Infrastructure projects, especially highways, so there are a lot of projects which get exempted. So anything with respect to national security, for instance, are exempted from environmental impact assessment. So that has led to deforestation, especially in border areas, because of the security issues that India faces with respect to, on the western and on the eastern border sectors. Even in other parts of the country, as I mentioned, national highways have led to high amount of deforestation. So Western Ghats, I haven't worked on deforestation that much, but from my experience on working on the Western Ghats region, which is one of the most ecologically fragile areas in the world, and it's a highly biodiverse area as well, most of the states have seen high amount of deforestation, especially due to, as I mentioned, infrastructure projects, extractive industries, mining. Mining has been big in some of these states like Goa. Quarry activities, which is mostly for extracting rocks, for even building seawalls. Now this is a classic case of you are destroying the mountains to build seawalls, which are failing to protect you from cyclones. This is a classic case of how things happen. So yes, in this is a huge problem. But if you read the figures, actually India's forest area has increased because of the way forests are being measured. So, there's a huge question mark over that.
Thank you. Just before we carry on,
Sorry.
okay, was that me?
Hello.
Okay, before we carry on, we just have 10 minutes left, so we'd like to get through all the 4 questions. So may I just request that everyone keep their responses short and sweet, please. So Dr. Jyoti, you're next.
Yeah.
We're still on the deforestation question.
Yes, so deforestation, 2.5 million acres of land per year is the sensitive data, but then it is there in for you to check and see that 2.5 million acres of land per year is deforested in India, and this has led to massive soil erosion, flooding, and pollution. So I guess that is with regard to the statistics. And 60%, as I'd mentioned in my presentation also, 60% of the arable land today suffers from environmental degradation. And I just have those, I think that should suffice for the data that one is looking for. And I'll stop there.
Thank you. Ms. Sue, please.
I think Indonesia is among the highest deforestation, have the highest deforestation rate in the world. I think Indonesia lost about 50% of all tree covers for the last decades. I don't know, 10 years or 20 years. I think about 50% of the tree cover has been lost due to deforestation or forest fire. In fact, Indonesia's carbon emission mainly also attributed towards the forest and land use factor. And I think latest research also shown that deforestation has been highly linked towards industrial purposes. So not just due to climate change, but mainly due to industrial purposes. Indonesia and the region, I think, even has an annual event. I think Indonesia or Malaysian and Singaporean knows this. It's like a annual thing. It's a cross-border haze pollution. So every dry season, there will be like a massive forest fires happening, and the haze pollution even reached towards Malaysia from Indonesia, and that is very concerning. Indonesia forest mainly lost to industrial practices such as palm oil plantation and other. I think other than haze pollution as well, Indonesia as the hotspot for biodiversity also suffers from it. But still, Indonesia government very optimistic towards what they claim as forest action, and they are still aiming to be a carbon net sink by 2030, which is, I feel, is highly, like, overly optimistic. Thank you.
Thank you. Professor, please.
Yes, let me share with you one news which happened today, that the Diet passed the new legislation on economic security, focusing on the securing supply chain and also promoting the idea of SDGs, which is deeply related to the questions of the deforestation, climate change, or the food security issues. The idea is for Japanese governments how to avoid the risk of the weaponization of the energy or food or this kind of non-traditional security items in order to ensure the free and open supply chains and also mitigate the competitions. The idea is that the environmental challenge should be depoliticized, and also energy supply must be secured. If we fail to do that, then somebody will weaponize these food supplies or energy supplies that will have a deep impact, a bad impact on the mindset. Then we will have less cooperations and more competitions. The idea is that environmental challenge is a real one, and that will be the part of the security dialogue. I will stop here. Thank you.
Thank you. I think I'm, in the interest of time, just going to open it to any one of the panelists to sort of respond to the academia and policymakers, the question on academia and policymakers. Yes, please go ahead, Dr. Jyoti.
Yeah, so, I think it's time that we consider these non-traditional approaches, especially related to environment degradation, as a traditional approach, and give it as much pertinent and importance as a traditional approach, because perhaps then the government will get serious about it, because we are very serious about our territorial boundaries, which any nation should be. But at the same time, the sooner we realize, I hope it's not too late by that time. So we need to focus on climate resilience. That should become our motto and our priority. And like I said, environment security plus water security should lead us to planetary health. This should become the motto of the governments. And I think it's time that this particular non-traditional security is taken up as important as a traditional security by the states. Thank you.
Thank you. And I think the professor has commented a bit on the food security part. Would there be anyone else on the panel who would like to just quickly comment on the food security question? No, if not, we'll move on to the last question, the importance of regional organizations. So I think this one is important enough for everyone to just give a brief comment on it. So can we start with Dr. Dhanasri, please?
Okay. So when it comes to regional organizations in South Asia, I mean, to be honest, they don't really work well. We have seen that SARC was established a long time ago, and it has taken up a lot of environmental issues, including climate change, disaster management related issues, all of that under its belt. But SARC itself has not been functioning well. So it has led to largely failures on, coordinating any sort of response or cooperation on these issues. There are other regional organizations which are also talking about planetary health related concerns, like this BIMSTEC, which is Bay of Bengal based regional organization. You have Indian Ocean region, the IORA, which is an Indian Ocean Regional Association. So you have all these organizations, but largely they have also failed to address these issues, but they do have a role. And it's very clear because a lot of these issues are very common to all the countries in this region. So there are more than enough imperatives for them to come together for knowledge sharing, for capacity building, training, and trying to pool their resources together, because all these countries are not at high levels of development as such. So there is a requirement to also pool resources. And if that's about the regional organizations. And just if I can add one little comment also on what role can the academia play. I think it's very important from an academic perspective is the fact that we need to look at whose vision of planetary health are we talking about. Who are the actors involved in conceptualizing and building policies towards planetary health, and also looking at these diverse views. That is very important, because especially coming from developing countries, you have different types of communities that live in different, they have different priorities as we talk about it. So it's important that we, in academia, we also think about these notions when we build conceptualizations around planetary health. And yeah, there again, issues of justice and fairness and efficiency and consistency and all these issues which we have already discussed under, like sustainability, would also feature. But yes, it needs to be reinterpreted in a way that it is more, it's about not just the current generations, but also the future generations. Yeah.
Thank you. Dr. Jyoti, please.
Yeah, I think SARC has been merely dysfunctional in South Asian region. I totally agree. But, it's not always important to have a specific regional organization to start doing something with regard to environment. You know, unofficially also through people-to-people contacts, also through NGOs also, one can try and build a bonhomie with respect to environmental issues and situations, because they affect all of us. I think I leave it at that.
Thank you. Ms. Su, please.
Yeah, so I think to address the regional mechanisms or actor for these planetary health questions, I totally agree with Ms. Dana that knowledge sharing, pool resources is very important, especially in the mitigation and also adaptation process in the region. But I also want to raise one more thing, that is pool of the voices. For example, Indonesia as the G20 presidency plays a significant role here to, put out more voices from developing perspective towards the global agenda, and how we frame the global agenda to benefit also the developing countries. And I think regional actor plays a very important part here, for example, in ASEAN, in the peacemaking, for example. And I think this also in line with the key messages for academic players. I think we have to have a coherent translation of sciences to the public. Science will only sit there if there is no dissemination to the public, and if we don't do something to do, like, for example, policy advocacy. So I think we need to take back that role in policy influence from the business players, for example, because now I think it's still very uneven between business players and also academia. Academia should play a neutral role in seeing the concept of planetary health, and also promoting other parts of issues regarding the human lives, for example. Thank you.
Thank you. Professor, please.
Okay. This is the third time to join this workshop, and this is the first time to do online. And my visit to Singapore this time is very ecological and very friendly to the environment. So that means sharing knowledge through online or hybrid system is very good for the environment. Then, as to the international organizations or peace operations, well, our focus is ASEAN, plus the focusing on the cluster approach proposed by the United Nations, plus the triangular cooperation, that is to support the regional, international, the center, and Japan provide a kind of technique or equipment. Then we have a triangular format, sharing the regional impact and having a local staff to work with us. I think UN or ASEAN can provide in top tier the knowledges or the kind of norms. Then Japan can provide the equipment or the kind of tool to do that, and then have a local impact. I think that may be the hybrid nature of cooperation at this time. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And thanks everyone for your patience. We've overshot, so we're going to end the session now. So please join me in thanking our speakers.